Brought to you by End Times Prophecy News Update, The Christian Home, with host Carrie Geren Scoggins. Hi, and welcome back to another quick update from the Christian Homes, the Christian Craft Room. From here at End Times Prophecy News Update, Carrie Geren Scoggins. Today, showing just a quick video on how to use honeysuckle vines, muscadine vines, and trumpet vines to make inexpensive nature crafts such as Christmas wreaths. And also using wild vines to make a Christian cross base for a floral arrangement. I'm starting with a round wreath base using a trumpet vine. I used heavy gauge floral wire using silver in order to be seen by the camera. As you can see where I've tied it off in certain points. Just take the trumpet vine, muscadine vine, or that which you have, and just begin wrapping it into a circle. And using floral wire, hopefully heavy gauge wire if you have it, if not, double wrap it. And do so in several spots to keep it in a round form. Some people, when using honeysuckle vine, choose to soak the vine for several days in water, hoping to make it more pliable. Trumpet vine forms into shape much more easily and is the vine of choice if readily available. For a small, simple vine wreath with just pine cones, go ahead and wire the pine cones onto one side of the wreath, unless you intend to make the whole wreath wrapped in pine cones. I used floral wire to wrap 2 pine cones together at a time and then attach them to the wreath. They're easier to take off doing it this way rather than floral wire on each cone, but whichever's easiest for you. I intend to use this wreath for another demonstration and therefore wish to be able to remove the pine cones more easily. Again, I used a heavy gauge silver wire so that it could be seen by the camera, but for home usage, I would suggest the smaller gauge green floral wire. And they also make a brown if it's available in your area from your local craft store. And here you see the beginnings of a standard basil flower arrangement on a wreath. For those that are not familiar with wreath making, I'm going to share some photos showing the basic form as one builds a wreath. Larger flowers coupled together, sometimes around a large bow, and sometimes just based around 2 to 3 large basil flowers, and then smaller flowers around that. In this Christmas wreath, you see 2 large poinsettias as the base for the arrangement. These are called the basil flowers. The basil flowers are surrounded by smaller flowers and then the greenery. With this wreath, someone intended to use a large bow in lieu of basil flowers when compared to this wreath, where the larger flowers are coupled together in the center, and then the smaller flowers stream from it. This is more of a standard floral design. The wreath tends to be more full. If the basil flowers and the larger flowers are together, and the smaller flowers extend around those are called filler flowers. Though this is a standard floral design, and that which one would see done by a professional florist, remember, if this is for your home, make it to your liking, and you can always change it later. With this arrangement, we see the large bow with basil flowers strategically located closer to the large bow in a basal arrangement fashion. Adding a side note on small items such as birdhouses attached to the wreath, that was a passing fad some 10-15 years ago. Some still like this design. If you like it, it's your home. What is important is that you like the design and you feel comfortable with it in your home. This is another basil floral design using only one large basil flower. Usually the wreath has 2 to 3 large basil flowers. In this wreath, they've used extra filler flowers, but it works. Back to my small trumpet vine wreath, building a basil flower design from a large bow with pine cones as the base. After we build this wreath, I will show easy instructions on how to make the bow itself. With the idea of building a base in a floral arrangement, it's putting the larger items together and tapering off to smaller items. In this case, in the wreath, the larger items being the pine cones and the bow, and then tapering off smaller into smaller filler flowers. I had prearranged the large pine cones together at the bottom of the wreath, added the bow, and now we'll taper off with smaller pine cones. Strategically placing the smaller pine cones above the bow, therefore tapering off from a large base as I move towards the top of the wreath. I wired these pine cones to the wreath. Some people also use a hot glue gun, and as an added measure, if you're having a hard time holding the pine cones in place, still use the floral wire and just touch the wire with a little hot glue and hold it in place until it dries. Pine cones can be crumbly. Try to pick the best ones you can find. For an extra added holiday touch, some people go over the end of the pine cone with just a little bit of gold craft paint, or possibly something like glitter. When using glitter, they usually dab a little glue on it and then drop the glitter onto it. However, this does get off on your carpet. It is my suggestion that if you're going to do so, take a sponge, use the craft paint, and just barely go over the edge of the pine cone with either gold or silver. Moving on to adding filler flowers. Using a small bunch from the Dollar Tree. Use wire cutters to cut off each separate flower stem from the bunch. Here is an area where many people find their flaw. Not cutting the stems of the flowers off of the bunch. I've seen many people use a small, cheap bunch of flowers, stick them down in something such as styrofoam, and not separate them off from the base. Go ahead and use your wire cutters, remove them from the bunch, and then go ahead and attach them to the base. Whether you're going to wire them on, hot glue them on, or stick them in styrofoam, it's always best to remove them from the actual bunch that you buy them in. Strategically place the smaller filler flowers and greenery around your base. In this case, small poinsettias and greenery, which is faux fir, fake fir tree, placed around the pine cones and large bow base. I kept the cost of making this wreath down to just $3. The wild vine, gathered from my property, and the ribbon for the bow, and 2 bunches of flowers, all from Dollar Tree, adding up to $3. I used the silk holly with gold trim as the extended filler flowers for an added touch of holiday glimmer, yet keeping costs down, as that is the goal. As you can see, this made a nice, simple $3 Christmas wreath that can be used from year to year. While one could add extra Spanish moss or green moss and cover over the areas where the floral wire is to, quote, hide your work, hot glue it onto the wreath, fill in the wreath with extra vine, add more filler flowers and greenery. The idea was to keep the wreath small and cheap and be a good starter wreath for our beginning wreath makers. One can get more elaborate with their wreaths in many ways. One such idea would just be to cover the whole wreath in pine cones and still only use 1 to 2 bushes of flowers, and can still make a great Christmas wreath such as the one seen here. Creating that wonderful Christmas ambiance, that family feeling of Christmas, usually revolves around the use of Christmas lights, and working those into your arrangement as well. If you intend to use Christmas lights, put the lights on first before you begin piecing your arrangement together upon the wreath. In making Christian holiday wreaths, there's many different designs. The Christian fish, and some even make a cross from vine. I'm adding this quick snippet of how to piece vine together to make the Christian cross using wild vine. In this case, again, I am using vine from my own property wrapped with floral wire. This is trumpet vine, again, which is the easiest to work with. When using an unusual shaped wreath such as a cross, one generally does not follow a basal design. I just follow the design of the cross and let the flowers just accentuate it. In this case, in the picture you see, is the beginning of piecing dried wild flowers together and attaching it to the Christian cross. When using dried flowers, many use the small gauge floral wire and hot glue. Finished out with dried flowers, this makes a very pretty wreath. However, it is not a holiday wreath. So moving on, I will show you how I decorated a small homemade vine cross. Using silk holiday berries, I followed the design of the cross, making an arrangement more toward the center, and using silk holly with gold trim for a holiday touch. Again, I used heavy gauge silver floral wire in order for you to be able to see where I tied the vine together. I did not hide my work by hot gluing moss over the areas where I've had to use floral wire, as one would do in a professional manner. I wanted my work to be seen in order to be copied. These are very simplistic wreaths. They're good starter wreaths for those that have not made any before. And both of these projects are under $3 each, or right at $3 each. If you don't have any floral wire or wire cutters, one can usually borrow these from a man in your family, someone that does construction work, or is a handyman around the house. Ask him if you can borrow his wire cutters and see if he has any wire laying around that might be used, even if it's just thin gauge copper wiring. This video was not pieced together for those that can afford expensive flowers and to buy all of the items needed. Those ladies who have this kind of extra cash lying around can just pay someone to make their wreath. It costs the same when compared to buying expensive flowers from a craft store. It's just as cheap to go ahead and buy the wreath already made. I made this video for those that want to design on a dime. And if you wish your flowers to appear to be more expensive or elaborate, you can always, again, touch up the edges of the flowers just like you would the pine cone on the very tips only with gold paint or silver. And again, you can add some glitter. That's generally the difference between the cheaper flowers on the bush and the more expensive you find in the craft stores. Just that extra touch, and we can do that ourselves. Buying Christmas flowers on the bush, such as poinsettias, are easy to spice up. On to how to make a bow for a wreath or an arrangement. Starting, making your tail. Size it up to the size of the bow, and if you have a two-sided ribbon, remember, you have to put that center twist in it, like so, as seen on the screen. Twist it in the middle, and leave your streamers on both sides, short streamers for a small bow. Make your first loop, then twist it in the middle, halfway round. If you've got two-sided ribbon, make sure that the inside faces outward, and then turn and make your second loop. Make that half twist in the center, and hold those centers together, making sure they don't slip out of your hand. Go on and make the next loop the same size as the first loop, where you basically have 4 loops, 2 on each side that are the same size, because one is going to go upward, one will go downward. Come back, twist it in the center again, and then make smaller loops for the inside. Again, twisting it in the center, holding your centers together with your fingers. Don't let those centers slip out. Keep them all together as you're making your bow. You want at least 4 loops of each size in the back and then again in the front. And I always put a center loop to make a center to the bow. When you've made all of your loops, use your floral wire, and it's good to have that floral wire pre-cut. Use the floral wire to hold down where you have the centers of your bow, where you've been holding it together with your hand. Use your floral wire to wrap it around and tighten it up as tight as you can get it so that it doesn't slip back out. Go ahead and add the streamer at the bottom as the very last thing you do making your bow, and go ahead and tighten up the floral wire then. Then pull your loops one up and one down, until you get a standard bow. If you pulled it in the wrong direction, just keep playing with it until you get it right. This is a standard shape bow. These make good tree topper bows for Christmas trees, packages, wreaths, and many other usages. And a word on dried flowers before I go. It's easier to get wild flowers that have already dried in the field after fall than it is to try to bring them into your home, hang them upside down, and dry them yourself. It takes a lot of extra space to do so, and they generally do not turn out well. You can find a lot of beautiful wildflowers that have dried in the field naturally and have taken the shape that fits your wreath or your floral arrangement. Just a hint. And during the winter season, you can find a plethora of things such as dried sumac. Looks great in a holiday wreath. It retains its red color after drying on the tree. There's a lot of really great designs that one can work dried sumac into. Again, it's best if it's dried on the vine, so to speak. Drying naturally rather than trying to bring it into your home and do so yourself. Dried magnolia leaves on a pre-made wire form make beautiful dried arrangements. The fields are full of dried flowers, ladies. Maybe we'll have some more of these in future videos. This has been another End Times Prophecy News Update. Carrie Geren Scoggins, The Christian Home, The Christian Craft Room. Thank you for tuning in. Brought to you by End Times Prophecy News Update, The Christian Home, with host Carrie Geren Scoggins.